Joining me now from York University is labor expert Steven Tufts. Good morning, Steven. Glad that you could be with us. Let's begin by talking about this whole issue of unpaid work. It seems as though that is no longer going to be an issue for 10,000 Air Canada flight attendants. Why do you think it took this long to reach that point in the bargaining?
Well, this is a transformational change of the way compensation works in the industry. A lot of airlines historically have paid by flight. And in recent years, especially as flights become more complex and scheduling becomes more complex and delays are more common, especially coming out of the pandemic, flight attendants globally, not just in Air Canada, have said enough is enough. We need to be paid for ground time. And this was going to happen anyway. In fact, Air Canada had made some movement on this issue before the strike even started. It was just about how much to pay for ground time and the rate as well. So I think this is a generational agreement. And Air Canada, as employees, have probably achieved something quite significant when we get the details.
So what's the background to this whole unpaid work? I think a lot of people wondered, how did we even get to this place? How was this even negotiated in previous contracts?
Well, it starts with, goes back to flight attendants when they had no power before they were even unionized. And it just was more convenient for companies to pay per flight. That way they can actually control and predict costs. If flight, for example, is paid for 2 hours of labor and it's delayed for 3 hours, you're still only having to pay flight attendants for that 2 hours in the air. And again, that wasn't sustainable. It's long overdue that this has changed, and it's going to change probably quite rapidly over the next coming years throughout the industry in North America and beyond. And again, just because it's always been done one way doesn't mean that it's right. And I think it's going to be better for passengers in the long run, because now Air Canada and other airlines are really going to be incentivized to get the planes running on time. Because if they do delay for 2 hours because they haven't hired enough baggage handlers or different reasons, and people are standing on the tarmac, that's going to cost them. And I think this is something that has been neglected in the discussion. Sometimes changes in compensation can help passengers as well.
And once we get through the next 7 to 10 days with the resumption of a normal schedule, I think people, when they're booking, are going to start to wonder, are my flights going to cost me more because the Air Canada flight attendants have this new deal? They're getting an increase. They're getting paid for all the time that they work. Your thoughts on that? Will this mean something for consumers, for travelers?
Okay, of course, the accounting is always disputed. First of all, Air Canada, very wealthy company. They've made billions of dollars in profits. Even coming out of the pandemic has been really accelerated in their revenue. They've had a 10-year agreement with labor peace, in which real wages actually declined. So this is partly just a catch-up agreement. And I think the final thing is that there has been some numbers cast around that at most this agreement might be 2% into revenue. So it's really not something that's going to cripple a very profitable company. Air Canada can absorb this, and they can pay fair wages and pay workers fairly with the revenue that they generate from us.
So final thought then from you, and you've sort of hinted at this. This is historic and likely to set, what, a precedent for other unions, Steven?
Yeah, I think this is really an important historic strike that we're already noting. This is when flight attendants, largely women, stood up to an employer and they stood up to the government. And they said, enough is enough when you're violating our basic rights to bargain freely. And I think what is going to happen over the next little while is Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code, that some people argue has been abused in recent years by the federal government, is maybe hit a wall, and it's maybe there's going to be the brakes put on it. Because the only power that directive has is when workers comply. And when workers say, no, this isn't fair, we're not going back to work, then employers are in a mess. And that's what we saw over the last few days with Air Canada.
Steven Tufts is a labor expert. Steven, really glad you could join us. Thanks again.